What if every moment you've lived is still happening right now? What if the past isn't a memory, but a place you've never actually left? Welcome back to another gentle exploration where science meets wonder, where the impossible becomes quietly possible, and where the deepest questions about reality invite us to pause, breathe, and consider what it truly means to exist in time. I'm here to guide you through one of the most haunting possibilities in all of philosophy and physics, that you might be trapped in the past, experiencing it over and over again without ever realizing it. Tonight, we're diving into the profound question of whether time moves forward at all, or whether we're caught in an endless loop, replaying the same moments, the same thoughts, the same choices, like actors in a cosmic theatre who've forgotten they're performing the same play every single night. It's a journey that will take us from ancient Greek philosophy to cutting-edge neuroscience, from the psychology of trauma to the mathematics of eternal recurrence. As you settle in, perhaps with a warm cup of tea or nestled under a favourite blanket, I invite you to let your mind wander into this strange territory. Don't worry about understanding every detail. Instead, let these ideas wash over you like gentle waves, each one carrying you deeper into a mystery that has puzzled humanity for thousands of years. Take a moment right now and think about your earliest childhood memory. Can you see it clearly? The colours, the sounds, maybe even the smell of that moment. Here's something remarkable. Neuroscientists have discovered that every time you remember something, you're not just retrieving a file from some mental storage cabinet. You're literally reconstructing that experience, rebuilding it in your brain, using the same neural pathways that fired when it originally happened. But here's where it gets strange. Some memories don't just visit us occasionally. They move in permanently, setting up residence in our minds like unwelcome guests who refuse to leave. For millions of people around the world, traumatic memories don't fade into the background of consciousness. Instead, they replay with such vivid intensity that the past becomes more real than the present moment. Consider Sarah, a woman I read about in a clinical study. 20 years after a car accident, she still experiences the same crushing sensation in her chest, the same metallic taste of fear, the same split-second terror every time she closes her eyes. Her brain hasn't just stored this memory, it's trapped inside it, replaying those few seconds of impact in an endless loop. The past hasn't ended for Sarah. It's happening right now, again and again, with the same emotional intensity as the day it occurred. This isn't metaphor. This is measurable brain science. When researchers scan the brains of people experiencing traumatic flashbacks, they see something extraordinary. The same neural networks that were active during the original trauma light up with identical patterns. The amygdala floods with stress hormones. The hippocampus struggles to place the memory in proper temporal context. In a very real sense, the brain believes it's still experiencing that past moment. But trauma is just the most dramatic example of a phenomenon that touches all of us. Think about the songs that instantly transport you back to high school, or the smell of your grandmother's kitchen that makes you feel 5 years old again. These aren't just nostalgic moments, they're evidence that the past lives inside you with startling immediacy, that your nervous system doesn't distinguish between then and now as clearly as you might think. Dr. Yelena Radulovic, a neuroscientist at Northwestern University, has made a discovery that sounds like science fiction but is grounded in rigorous research. She's found that traumatic memories are encoded using different brain mechanisms than normal memories. It's as if the brain operates on 2 radio frequencies, one for everyday experiences and another for overwhelming events. When something traumatic happens, the brain switches to this alternate frequency, encoding the memory using what she calls extrasynaptic GABA receptors. These memories become locked away, inaccessible, through normal recall, but triggered by specific emotional or environmental cues. It's like having a secret radio station in your mind that only broadcasts one song over and over whenever the right signal appears. This means that for some people, the past isn't just remembered, it's relived with perfect fidelity. The same cascade of stress hormones, the same muscle tension, the same flood of emotions. Time becomes circular instead of linear. The moment never truly ends because the brain keeps recreating it with biological precision. As you listen to this, notice how your own memories feel in your body right now. Are there moments from your past that seem to carry more weight, more presence than others? Can you sense how certain experiences feel less like distant history and more like they're happening just beneath the surface of awareness? This experience of being trapped in repeating patterns isn't a modern discovery. Ancient philosophers and mystics have been grappling with this possibility for millennia. In ancient Greece, the Stoics believed in something called eternal recurrence. They proposed that the universe itself goes through endless cycles of destruction and rebirth, with each cycle playing out exactly the same events in precisely the same way. Imagine that everything you've ever done, every choice you've made, every word you've spoken has happened infinite times before and will happen infinite times again. Your first kiss, your greatest triumph, your deepest regret, all of it scripted by the cosmos to repeat endlessly. The Stoics believed that massive cosmic fires would periodically consume everything, only for the universe to rebuild itself atom by atom into the exact same configuration. This wasn't just philosophical speculation, it was their attempt to understand why life often feels so repetitive, why the same types of conflicts arise generation after generation, why human nature seems locked into predictable patterns despite our belief in progress and change. But the Greeks weren't alone in this thinking. Hindu and Buddhist traditions speak of enormous cosmic cycles called kalpas, vast periods of time during which the universe expands and contracts like a cosmic heartbeat. In these traditions, souls are trapped in samsara, the wheel of rebirth, destined to repeat the same lessons, make the same mistakes, and experience the same sufferings until they achieve enlightenment. Indigenous cultures across the world have similar concepts. The Aztecs believed in cyclical ages, each ending in destruction and renewal. Native American traditions speak of the sacred hoop, an endless circle where all things return to their beginning. These weren't primitive superstitions. They were sophisticated attempts to explain the feeling that many people have, that we're somehow stuck, replaying the same dramas on both personal and cosmic scales. In the late 1800s, German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche took this ancient idea and turned it into something both terrifying and liberating. He called it eternal recurrence, and he presented it as the ultimate test of human character. Imagine, Nietzsche suggested, that a demon appeared to you in your darkest moment and whispered this truth. This life as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more. Every pain and every joy, every thought and sigh, everything unutterably small or great in your life will return to you, all in the same succession and sequence. How would you respond to such news? Would you be crushed by the weight of endless repetition? Or would you embrace it, declaring that you would choose to live this exact life again and again for eternity? Nietzsche wasn't necessarily claiming that eternal recurrence was literally true. He was using it as a thought experiment, a way to force us to confront how we really feel about our choices. If you knew you had to live your life exactly as it is infinite times, would you change anything? Would you finally have that difficult conversation? Would you pursue that dream you've been postponing? Would you love more deeply, create more boldly, forgive more completely? The genius of Nietzsche's idea is that it reveals something profound about human psychology. Most of us live as if our choices don't really matter, as if we can always start over tomorrow, as if the future will somehow be fundamentally different from the past. But if the past never truly ends, if we're destined to repeat every moment endlessly, then every choice becomes infinitely important. Breathe deeply for a moment and consider this possibility. If you had to live this day over and over again for eternity, how would that change how you're experiencing this very moment? Would you pay attention differently? Would you treat yourself and others with more care? While ancient philosophers could only speculate about eternal recurrence, we're living through something that might be its technological manifestation. Social media algorithms have created what researchers call filter bubbles, digital environments that feed us the same types of information, the same political viewpoints, the same cultural references over and over again. Your smartphone has become a kind of time machine, but instead of taking you to the future, it keeps pulling you back into familiar patterns. The algorithm learns what captures your attention and serves up endless variations of the same content. You scroll through the same types of posts, react with the same emotions, engage with the same arguments, day after day after day. Dr. Sherry Turkle, a professor at MIT who studies technology's impact on human relationships, has observed something troubling. Many of her students report feeling trapped in digital loops, compulsively checking their devices for updates that rarely contain anything genuinely new. They describe a sensation of living in an eternal present that somehow never moves forward, a constant refreshing of feeds that deliver the illusion of novelty while keeping them psychologically locked in the same place. This isn't just about technology, it's about how modern life has become structured around repetitive cycles. You wake up, check your phone, drink coffee, commute to work, sit in the same chair, have similar conversations, eat similar meals, watch similar entertainment, and go to sleep, only to wake up tomorrow and do it all again with minor variations. The psychologist Viktor Frankl, who survived wartime prison camps, wrote about this phenomenon long before smartphones existed. He observed that many people, even when free to make choices, unconsciously recreate the same patterns over and over again. They change jobs but find themselves dealing with similar conflicts. They end one relationship and enter another with the same dynamics. They move to new cities but quickly recreate familiar social environments. This pattern of repetition isn't limited to individual psychology. Historians and sociologists have identified cycles that seem to trap entire civilizations in repeating patterns. The historian William Strauss and Neil Howe proposed that American society goes through predictable generational cycles, roughly every 80 to 100 years, with each cycle containing 4 distinct phases or turnings. According to their research, we're currently in what they call a crisis period, similar to the American Revolution, the Civil War, and World War II. Each crisis follows the same basic pattern. Institutions lose credibility, social unity breaks down, and the society faces an existential challenge that forces it to either transform or collapse. But here's what's haunting about their theory. If they're correct, then we're not just living through unprecedented times. We're living through a script that's been performed multiple times before, with different actors but the same basic plot. The issues change: slavery, fascism, economic collapse, but the underlying social dynamics remain eerily similar. The economist Peter Turchin has taken this idea even further, using mathematical models to predict social unrest with startling accuracy. His research suggests that societies oscillate between periods of integration and disintegration in cycles that can be measured and predicted. We're not making progress in a straight line. We're moving in circles, albeit very large ones, that take generations to complete. This raises a profound question about human agency. Are we making free choices, or are we unconsciously following scripts written by history itself? When you vote, start a business, choose a partner, or decide to have children, are you exercising your individual will, or are you playing a role in a drama that's been performed countless times before? Yet within this seemingly deterministic framework, there are moments of startling clarity. Psychologists call them metacognitive awareness. Moments when you step outside your automatic patterns and observe them with fresh eyes. It's like waking up in the middle of a dream and realizing you're dreaming, except you're waking up in the middle of your life and realizing how much of it runs on autopilot. These moments can be triggered by many things: a serious illness, the death of someone close to you, travel to a radically different culture, or sometimes just an unexpected conversation that shifts your perspective. Suddenly, the invisible prison of routine becomes visible. You see how you've been unconsciously repeating the same thoughts, reactions, and choices for years, or even decades. The meditation teacher Jon Kabat-Zinn describes this as falling awake, a sudden recognition that you've been sleepwalking through your own life. In these moments, time seems to pause. The relentless forward momentum of daily life stops and you glimpse something beyond the cycle of repetition. But here's what's both beautiful and challenging about these awakenings. They're temporary. The patterns reassert themselves. The momentum of habit pulls you back into familiar grooves. The question becomes, once you've seen the loop, how do you break free from it? How do you create genuine change instead of just rearranging the same pieces in slightly different configurations? Take a moment right now to notice your own patterns. What thoughts have you had today that you've had hundreds of times before? What emotions are you carrying that feel familiar, perhaps too familiar? What choices are you making that echo choices you've made before? There's no judgment in this observation, just curiosity about the hidden structures that shape your experience of time. As we continue this exploration, we'll dive deeper into the question of whether escape is possible, or whether the recognition of the loop is itself part of the pattern. We'll explore what quantum physics might tell us about the nature of time, and whether consciousness itself might be the key to understanding why the past feels so persistently present. But for now, rest in the strange comfort of knowing you're not alone in this temporal maze. Every human being who has ever lived has grappled with the feeling that they're somehow stuck, repeating variations of the same story. Perhaps that recognition itself is the first step toward whatever freedom might be possible within the grand cycles of existence. There's something profoundly unsettling about the moment you first recognize your own patterns. It's like catching a glimpse of yourself in an unexpected mirror and realizing you've been making the same facial expression for hours without knowing it. Except instead of a momentary grimace, you're seeing decades of unconscious repetition stretching behind you like a trail of breadcrumbs you never meant to leave. Dr. Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize-winning psychologist, spent his career studying how the human mind creates shortcuts that often trap us in predictable loops. He discovered that our brains are essentially prediction machines, constantly trying to anticipate what comes next based on what happened before. But this evolutionary gift becomes a temporal prison when the patterns we've learned no longer serve us. Consider how you respond to stress. Right now, as you listen to these words, your nervous system is running background programs that were written years or even decades ago. When faced with uncertainty, do you withdraw? Do you become hyper-vigilant? Do you seek control through planning every detail? These responses were learned during specific moments in your past, yet they continue to play out automatically, as if those original situations were still happening. The neuroscientist Dr. Joe Dispenza describes this as living in the memorized self. Your personality, he suggests, is really just a collection of thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that you've repeated so often they feel like who you are. But what if personality isn't fixed? What if it's just a very convincing performance of patterns learned long ago? Take a gentle breath and notice what's happening in your body right now. Are your shoulders tense? Is your jaw clenched? Are you holding your breath? These physical patterns are often the body's way of continuing conversations that began years ago. Your muscles remember arguments that ended decades past. Your nervous system still braces for threats that no longer exist. This isn't a flaw in the system. It's evidence of how thoroughly the past lives within you, shaping not just how you think, but how you inhabit your physical form. Every posture tells a story. Every gesture carries history. You're not just remembering the past, you're embodying it, moment by moment, breath by breath. Recent discoveries in neuroscience have revealed something that sounds almost mystical, but is grounded in rigorous research. Memory isn't a recording device that plays back exact copies of past events. Instead, it's a dynamic, creative process that reconstructs experiences each time you remember them. But here's where it gets truly strange. These reconstructions can actually change the original memory itself. Dr. Karim Nader at McGill University has shown that every time you recall a memory, it becomes temporarily unstable at the molecular level. During this window of instability, the memory can be updated, modified, or even corrupted by new information. This means that remembering the past literally changes the past, at least as it exists in your neural networks. Think about a childhood memory you've shared many times, perhaps a family story that gets told at gatherings, or a moment of triumph or embarrassment that you've recounted to friends over the years. Each time you've remembered and retold that story, you've potentially altered it. Details have been added, emotions have been shifted, meanings have been reinterpreted. The memory you have now might be quite different from what actually happened, yet it feels absolutely real and true. This creates a fascinating paradox. If your memories of the past are constantly changing, and those memories shape how you understand yourself and make decisions in the present, then the past is literally being rewritten by the present moment. You're not trapped in a fixed historical narrative. You're engaged in an ongoing creative collaboration between who you were and who you're becoming. But there's another layer to this mystery. Quantum physicists have discovered that at the subatomic level, observation actually changes what's being observed. The act of measuring a particle's properties forces it to choose a specific state from a range of possibilities. Some interpretations suggest that consciousness itself might play a role in this collapse from potential to actual. Now, this is speculative territory, and no scientific consensus exists about consciousness directly influencing quantum events. But the parallel is intriguing. Just as observing a quantum particle seems to crystallize its properties, observing your own mental patterns might have the power to change them. The very act of becoming aware of how you're trapped in cyclical thinking could be the beginning of freedom from those cycles. As you rest here, listening to these ideas wash over you like gentle waves, notice if you can sense your own awareness observing itself. Can you feel the strange recursive loop of consciousness, watching consciousness? This isn't just philosophical speculation. It's a direct exploration of how attention itself might be the key to transformation. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who coined the term collective unconscious, proposed something that sounds like science fiction, but feels intuitively true to many people. He suggested that beneath our individual consciousness lies a deeper layer of psyche that we share with all humanity. This collective unconscious contains what he called archetypes, universal patterns of thought and emotion that have emerged across cultures and throughout history. According to Jung, we're not just trapped in our personal patterns, we're also swimming in the ancient currents of human experience, unconsciously reenacting dramas that have played out for thousands of years. The jealous sibling, the wise elder, the innocent child, the wounded healer. These archetypal roles seem to appear spontaneously in every culture, as if they're built into the very structure of human consciousness. This might explain why certain conflicts feel so familiar, why some relationships seem to follow predictable scripts, and why historical events often echo each other across centuries. We're not just individuals making choices in isolation, we're part of a vast, interconnected web of human experience that has its own momentum, its own patterns, its own seemingly inevitable rhythms. The anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss discovered something similar in his study of myths and folk tales from around the world. Despite having no contact with each other, isolated cultures develop strikingly similar stories about creation, destruction, heroic journeys, and cosmic cycles. It's as if the human mind is programmed to think in certain patterns, to organize experience into familiar narratives that transcend individual culture and historical period. But Jung also believed that recognizing these patterns was the first step toward individuation, the process of becoming conscious of unconscious influences and thereby gaining some freedom from them. When you can see the archetypal drama you're unconsciously playing out, you create space for choice. You're no longer completely identified with the role. You become both the actor and the observer, participating in the ancient story while maintaining awareness that it is, in fact, a story. Right now, as you listen to these words, you might notice certain archetypal energies moving through your own psyche. Are you the seeker, hungry for hidden knowledge? The skeptic, questioning everything? The wounded one, hoping for healing? The wise one, already knowing these truths but enjoying hearing them expressed? Notice how these roles feel familiar, as if you've played them countless times before, in countless variations. In our current era, the ancient experience of being trapped in repeating patterns has taken on new dimensions through technology. Your smartphone, that device you probably check dozens of times per day, has become a kind of temporal anchor, constantly pulling your attention back to the same digital spaces, the same sources of stimulation, the same loops of information and social interaction. Dr. Adam Gazzaley, a neuroscientist at UC San Francisco, has studied how digital technology affects our relationship with time and attention. He's found that the constant switching between apps, notifications, and streams of information creates what he calls cognitive fragmentation. Instead of experiencing time as a flowing river, we experience it as a series of disconnected moments, each one interrupted before it can fully develop. This fragmentation has a strange effect on memory and identity. When your attention is constantly being redirected, you never fully inhabit any single moment. Everything becomes equally immediate and equally distant. The text you received 5 minutes ago feels as present as the conversation you had 5 years ago. The urgent email demanding an immediate response carries the same psychological weight as a childhood memory that surfaces unexpectedly. Social media algorithms have learned to exploit this temporal confusion. They feed you a mixture of current events, memories from years past, and speculative content about the future, all presented in an endless scroll that collapses time into an eternal present. Facebook literally calls this feature your timeline, but it's really more like a time vortex, pulling fragments from across your personal history and presenting them as if they're all happening now. The result is a kind of digital déjà vu, where you're constantly encountering echoes and variations of content you've seen before. The same political arguments with slightly different players, the same inspirational quotes with new graphics, the same relationship advice repackaged for a new generation. You think you're staying current, but you're actually treading water in a sea of recycled information. Yet there's something deeper happening here than just technological distraction. These digital loops might be revealing something fundamental about how human consciousness works. Maybe we've always been caught between past and present, memory and anticipation. Maybe technology is just making visible what was always true, that the mind naturally creates loops, patterns, and repetitive cycles. Take a moment to observe your own relationship with digital devices. When you pick up your phone, what are you really looking for? Are you seeking new information, or are you hoping to recreate a feeling you've experienced before? Notice how the act of checking your device feels both necessary and somehow empty, like a ritual whose original meaning has been forgotten. Dr. Anne Gray Beale at MIT has spent decades studying the neurobiology of habits, and her discoveries reveal how deeply our brains are wired for repetition. She's found that when behaviours become habitual, they're processed in a part of the brain called the basal ganglia, which operates largely below the level of conscious awareness. This system is incredibly efficient, but it's also incredibly conservative. Once a pattern is established, the basal ganglia will keep executing it automatically, even when it's no longer adaptive or useful. This explains why changing habits is so difficult. You're not just fighting a conscious decision to do something different. You're trying to override a deeply ingrained neural program that runs without your permission. The pathway from cue to routine to reward becomes so well travelled that your brain treats it like a superhighway, while any alternative routes remain narrow, unpaved trails. But here's what's fascinating about Gray Beale's research. She's also discovered that habits exist within larger loops called chunks. Your morning routine, for example, might be one chunk that includes dozens of smaller habitual behaviours. These chunks can nest within even larger patterns that organise weeks, months, or years of your life. You might have a work chunk, a weekend chunk, a relationship chunk, each one containing its own internal rhythms and repetitions. The implications are staggering. If most of your daily experience is organised into these automatic chunks, then how much of your life are you actually consciously experiencing? How often are you truly present versus just executing well-rehearsed programs that your basal ganglia learnt years ago? Consider your own daily routine. From the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep, how much of what you do is genuinely chosen versus automatically triggered? The way you make your morning coffee, the route you take to work, the people you talk to and the topics you discuss, the shows you watch in the evening, How much of this is conscious choice versus neural autopilot? Dr. Judson Brewer, a psychiatrist who studies the neuroscience of meditation, has found that mindfulness practices can actually change these deep habit loops. By bringing conscious awareness to automatic patterns, you can begin to interrupt them before they fully activate. It's like catching yourself in the middle of a familiar dance and choosing to step in a different direction. But this requires what Brewer calls effortless effort, a kind of relaxed alertness that can notice patterns without getting caught up in them. It's the difference between being swept away by a river and learning to navigate its currents. You're still in the water, still influenced by its flow, but you've developed the skill to move more intentionally within it. As you listen to these words right now, you might experiment with this kind of gentle awareness. Notice what automatic patterns are running in your mind. Are you judging these ideas? Comparing them to things you already know? Planning what you'll do after this video ends? There's nothing wrong with these mental activities, but can you observe them without being completely absorbed by them? While we've been exploring the psychological and social dimensions of being trapped in time, quantum physics offers its own perspective on temporal loops that borders on the mystical. In the quantum world, particles don't follow the neat, linear cause and effect relationships we're familiar with in everyday life. Instead, they exist in what physicists call superposition, multiple possible states simultaneously, until something forces them to collapse into a single definite state. But here's where it gets really strange. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that this collapse might not be permanent. In what's called the many worlds interpretation, every possible outcome of every quantum event actually occurs, but in separate, parallel universes. This means that every choice you've ever made, every path you've ever taken, might exist simultaneously across an infinite multiverse of possibilities. From this perspective, you're not just trapped in one timeline. You're spread across countless variations of your life, each one exploring a different set of choices and outcomes. The version of you listening to these words right now is just one thread in a vast tapestry of parallel selves, each one convinced that their particular timeline is the only real one. This remains speculative territory, and no scientific consensus exists about parallel universes or consciousness directly influencing quantum events. But the implications are worth contemplating. If every possible version of your life exists somewhere in the multiverse, then the question isn't whether you can escape your patterns, but which patterns you choose to focus your awareness on. Some physicists have even proposed that consciousness itself might play a role in selecting which quantum possibilities become manifest in our experienced reality. This is highly controversial and unproven, but it suggests an intriguing possibility, that awareness itself might be a kind of time travel device, allowing you to shift your experience from one potential timeline to another. Dr. Stuart Hameroff and Sir Roger Penrose have proposed that consciousness might emerge from quantum processes within the microtubules of brain cells. If this is true, then your conscious experience might literally be quantum in nature, operating according to the strange non-linear laws that govern the subatomic world. Again, this is speculative science, not established fact, but it opens up fascinating questions about the relationship between mind and time. If consciousness is quantum, then maybe it's not bound by the linear progression of cause and effect that seems to govern the physical world. Maybe awareness can move backward as well as forward, accessing not just memories of the past, but actual past states of being. Take a moment to imagine this possibility. What if your consciousness could move freely through time, visiting not just your memories, but the actual moments themselves. What if the feeling of being trapped in repetitive patterns is really just your awareness getting stuck in familiar temporal locations, like a record player with a scratch that keeps jumping back to the same groove? If we accept that some form of cyclical repetition might be inherent to consciousness, and perhaps even to reality itself, then the question becomes, how do you work skillfully with these patterns rather than being unconsciously controlled by them? The ancient Buddhist concept of samsara offers some guidance here. Samsara is often translated as the wheel of suffering, but it's more accurately understood as the wheel of habitual reactivity. According to Buddhist psychology, we're trapped not by external circumstances, but by our automatic reactions to those circumstances. The same situations arise again and again: conflict, desire, fear, loss, and we respond with the same mental and emotional patterns, creating the same outcomes, which reinforce the same reactions, creating an endless cycle of repetition. But the Buddha also taught that this cycle could be interrupted through what he called right mindfulness, a quality of awareness that can observe patterns without being swept away by them. It's like learning to surf instead of being tumbled by waves. You're still in the ocean, still subject to its forces, but you've developed the skill to ride its energy rather than being overwhelmed by it. The meditation teacher Pema Chodron describes this as learning to stay with the rawness of experience without immediately jumping into your habitual reactions. When something difficult arises, anxiety, anger, sadness, fear, instead of automatically running your familiar coping strategies, you pause and feel the raw energy of the emotion itself, before it gets filtered through layers of interpretation and reaction. This creates what she calls a gap in the cycle of automatic reactivity. In that gap, new possibilities can emerge. You're no longer completely identified with your patterns. You become the space in which patterns arise and dissolve, the awareness that witnesses the dance of thoughts and emotions without being completely caught up in their drama. But this isn't about transcending or escaping your humanity. It's about developing a different relationship with the human experience, one that includes both participation and perspective. You're still playing the role in the cosmic drama, but you're also aware that you're playing a role. This double awareness, being both actor and observer, might be the key to freedom within the loops of time. As you rest here in this moment, listening to these ideas drift through your awareness, like clouds across a vast sky, notice that you can be both the one who is thinking and the one who observes the thinking. You can be both the one who is feeling and the one who witnesses the feeling. This witnessing awareness doesn't eliminate your patterns, but it gives you space to choose how you relate to them. Individual awakening to temporal patterns is profound, but what happens when entire societies begin to recognize their collective loops? Throughout history, there have been moments when cultures seem to suddenly see themselves with fresh eyes, recognizing patterns that had been invisible for generations. The Renaissance was one such moment, when European society began to question medieval assumptions and rediscover classical learning. The Enlightenment was another, when human reason was elevated above traditional authority. The 1960s represented a brief but intense period when many people simultaneously questioned fundamental assumptions about authority, consciousness, and social organization. These moments of collective awakening often feel like humanity is waking up from a long dream. Old patterns that seemed inevitable suddenly appear arbitrary and changeable. Social structures that seemed permanent reveal themselves as human constructions that can be reimagined and rebuilt. But these awakenings also trigger intense resistance. the momentum of established patterns doesn't give way easily. Institutions fight to maintain their authority. Individuals cling to familiar identities, even when those identities cause suffering. The pull toward the known is incredibly strong, even when the known is dysfunctional. Dr. Thomas Kuhn, in his study of scientific revolutions, observed that paradigm shifts follow a predictable pattern. First, anomalies begin to accumulate that can't be explained by the existing framework. Then a crisis phase emerges where the old paradigm clearly isn't working, but no new one has yet taken its place. Finally, if society is fortunate, a new paradigm emerges that can better account for the full range of evidence. We might be living through such a transition period right now. Many of our collective patterns, economic, political, environmental, social, are producing outcomes that fewer and fewer people find acceptable. Yet the alternatives remain unclear, contested, or seemingly impossible to implement. We're caught between a past that no longer works and a future that hasn't yet been born. This liminal space between paradigms can feel disorienting and frightening. Nothing feels solid, everything seems up for grabs, but it's also a space of tremendous creative potential. When old patterns lose their grip, new possibilities can emerge that would have been inconceivable within the previous framework. If you enjoy drifting through these explorations without interruption, members get every episode 48 hours early, completely ad-free. You can join them whenever you feel ready. Notice how this description of collective awakening resonates with your own experience. Do you sense that many of the old certainties are dissolving? Do familiar sources of meaning and identity feel less solid than they once did? This isn't necessarily a sign that something is wrong. It might be evidence that something is trying to be born. One of the most intriguing aspects of temporal loops is that they sometimes allow for progress, not through linear advancement, but through recursive deepening. Each time you cycle through a familiar pattern, you have the opportunity to experience it with greater awareness, deeper understanding, or more skillful action. Think about how you've handled heartbreak at different stages of your life. The first time, you might have been completely overwhelmed, unable to see beyond the immediate pain, but each subsequent experience of loss might have taught you something new about resilience, compassion, or the impermanent nature of emotional states. You're cycling through similar experiences, but each cycle adds depth and wisdom to your understanding. This is what the mystics meant when they spoke of the spiral path. You're not moving in a straight line towards some destination. You're circling around the same core themes and challenges, but each revolution brings you to a slightly higher level of understanding. From above, it might look like you're going in circles, but from the side you can see that the circles are actually an ascending spiral. The psychologist Claire Graves proposed something similar in his research on human development. He suggested that both individuals and societies move through predictable stages of consciousness, but these stages are arranged in a spiral pattern. As you develop, you don't leave the previous stages behind entirely. Instead, you integrate them into more complex and inclusive worldviews. This means that psychological and spiritual development might not be about escaping your patterns, but about transforming your relationship to them. The angry part of you doesn't disappear when you develop emotional intelligence. Instead, it becomes a conscious ally rather than an unconscious force. The fearful part doesn't vanish when you cultivate courage. Instead, it becomes a source of appropriate caution rather than paralyzing anxiety. From this perspective, being trapped in temporal loops isn't a problem to be solved, but a feature of how consciousness evolves. The repetition isn't evidence of failure. It's the mechanism through which awareness deepens and wisdom emerges. Each cycle gives you another opportunity to bring more consciousness to unconscious patterns, more choice to automatic reactions, more love to parts of yourself that have been exiled or rejected. As you reflect on your own life, can you see evidence of this spiral development? Are there themes that have appeared again and again, but with increasing depth and nuance? Are there challenges you've faced multiple times, but with growing skill and understanding? This isn't consolation prize for being unable to escape your patterns. It's recognition that the patterns themselves might be vehicles for awakening. Modern physics has revealed that time isn't the simple, linear progression that common sense suggests. Einstein's relativity showed that time is relative to the observer, that it can slow down or speed up depending on velocity and gravity. Quantum mechanics suggests that cause and effect might not always flow in the direction we expect, that future events might somehow influence past ones. But even without getting into exotic physics, our everyday experience of time is far more complex than the simple notion of moving from past through present to future. When you remember something, you're bringing the past into the present. When you plan or worry about something, you're pulling the future into now. When you're deeply absorbed in an activity, the usual sense of temporal progression can disappear entirely, leaving you in what psychologists call flow state, an eternal present where past and future fade into irrelevance. This suggests that the experience of being trapped in the past might not be a malfunction, but a natural consequence of how consciousness relates to time. Your awareness isn't actually located in any particular moment. Instead, it's the space in which all moments appear and disappear, the constant present within which memories of the past and anticipations of the future arise. The Zen teacher Alan Watts described this beautifully when he said that you can never experience the past or future directly. You can only experience them as present moment phenomena. Memories happen now, plans happen now, regrets, hopes, fears and dreams all happen now. The present moment isn't just a thin slice between past and future, it's the only context within which past and future have any meaning at all. This realization can be both liberating and disorienting. If everything is actually happening now, then the question of being trapped in the past becomes much more subtle. You're not trapped in the past, you're experiencing past pattern thoughts and emotions in the present moment. And since this is all happening now, it can potentially be influenced by present moment awareness. But this doesn't mean you can simply think your way out of deeply ingrained patterns. The body holds memory in ways that pure mental understanding cannot reach. Trauma lives in the nervous system, not just in thoughts. Habits are encoded in neural pathways that operate below the level of conscious intention. Yet even these somatic and neurological patterns are expressions of present moment life force, energy that is alive and therefore capable of change. Take a moment to sense this for yourself. As you listen to these words, notice that everything you're experiencing, thoughts, emotions, physical sensations, memories, anticipations, is happening right now. The past isn't somewhere behind you. It's present as memory. The future isn't somewhere ahead of you. It's present as imagination or expectation. This moment is the only place where life actually happens. Yet it's vast enough to contain all of time. Perhaps the deepest insight about temporal imprisonment is that the prison door might not be locked from the outside. The patterns that seem to trap you might actually be the very thing that can set you free once you learn to work with them consciously rather than being unconsciously driven by them. The meditation teacher Ram Dass, who spent decades exploring consciousness, an awakening, once said that the spiritual path is not about getting anywhere else, but about being where you are more completely. If you're caught in repeating patterns, the solution isn't necessarily to escape those patterns, but to bring such complete awareness to them that they transform from unconscious compulsions into conscious choices. This is a radical shift in perspective. Instead of seeing your patterns as evidence of your limitations, you begin to see them as your curriculum, the specific lessons that life is offering you, the difficult relationship that keeps replaying variations of the same drama, the work patterns you find yourself repeating at work, the emotional reactions that seem to arise automatically in certain situations. Rather than seeing these as evidence of your stuckness, what if they're actually the raw material for your awakening? This perspective doesn't minimize the genuine suffering that can come from feeling trapped in destructive cycles. Trauma is real, addiction is real, depression is real. These patterns can cause immense pain and require professional support, therapeutic intervention, or medical treatment. But even within the context of healing and recovery, there's often a moment when the pattern itself becomes the teacher. Dr. Gabor Mate, who has spent decades working with addiction and trauma, speaks about this paradox beautifully. He suggests that our most challenging patterns often represent our psyche's attempt to solve problems that arose much earlier in our lives. The addiction that seems to be destroying someone's life might have originally served as a brilliant survival strategy for an overwhelmed child. The anxiety that feels so limiting might have been a necessary hypervigilance in an unpredictable environment. When you can see your patterns through this lens of compassionate understanding, they begin to transform. They're no longer just problems to be eliminated, but expressions of a deep intelligence trying to protect and preserve you. The question becomes not how to get rid of them, but how to honour their original wisdom, while helping them evolve into more adaptive forms. Take a moment to consider one of your own recurring patterns with this kind of gentle curiosity. What if this pattern, however frustrating or limiting it might seem, originally developed as a creative solution to some challenge you are facing? What if it represents not your failure, but your resilience, your psyche's refusal to give up, even when circumstances seemed impossible? There's something profoundly musical about the way consciousness moves through time. Just as music relies on repetition, rhythms, melodies, and harmonies that return again and again, perhaps the temporal loops we experience are more like cosmic compositions than prisons. The same themes appear in different keys, at different tempos, with different orchestrations, creating complex symphonies of meaning that unfold across lifetimes. The composer Steve Reich built an entire career around what he called process music, compositions that take a simple pattern and gradually transform it through repetition. His piece, Music for 18 Musicians, consists of 11 chords that cycle continuously, but each repetition is slightly different, creating an effect that is both hypnotic and constantly evolving. Listeners often report that time seems to stretch or collapse while experiencing this music, as if they're being carried along by currents larger than ordinary temporal flow. This might be a metaphor for how consciousness itself operates. You're not trapped in static repetition, but participating in an evolving process where each cycle adds new harmonies, new variations, new depths of meaning. The conversation with your partner that feels like you've had it 100 times before might actually be a different movement in a longer composition, one that's slowly working towards some resolution you can't yet imagine. The neuroscientist Dr. Daniel Levitin has studied how music affects the brain and discovered that repetition is fundamental to how we process and remember information. We literally need patterns to make sense of experience. Without repetition, everything would be chaos, pure novelty with no context or meaning. The loops in your life aren't bugs in the system. They're features that allow consciousness to create coherent narratives from the flux of existence. But here's what's beautiful about musical repetition. It creates the foundation for improvisation. Jazz musicians learn standard songs not to play them exactly the same way every time, but to have a stable structure within which they can explore, experiment, and create something new. The more deeply you know the pattern, the more freedom you have to play with it. Perhaps this is the secret to working skillfully with temporal loops. Instead of trying to escape your patterns, you learn to improvise within them. You become so familiar with your own rhythms and melodies that you can begin to introduce variations, new harmonies, unexpected modulations that transform the entire composition while still honouring its essential structure. As you listen to these words, notice the rhythm of your own breathing, the steady pulse that has been with you since birth and will remain until your final moment. This is perhaps your most fundamental temporal loop, the basic rhythm that underlies all other patterns. Can you sense how each breath is both exactly the same and completely unique? How this most repetitive act is also constantly changing, constantly responding to your needs and circumstances? Every night you enter a natural laboratory for studying the fluid nature of time and the cyclical patterns of consciousness. In dreams, the normal rules of temporal progression dissolve. Past and present intermingle freely. People from different periods of your life appear together in impossible combinations. Events from decades ago replay with the immediacy of current experience. Dr. Matthew Walker, a leading sleep researcher at UC Berkeley, has discovered that dreams serve a crucial function in memory consolidation and emotional processing. During REM sleep, your brain literally rewrites your memories, integrating new experiences with older ones, finding patterns and connections that weren't apparent during waking consciousness. Dreams are your mind's natural way of working with temporal loops, exploring how past experience relates to present challenges. But dreams also reveal something profound about the nature of identity itself. In dreams, you might experience yourself as different ages simultaneously. You might be your current self dealing with a situation from childhood, or your child self possessing knowledge you've only acquired as an adult. The boundaries between different versions of yourself become porous, suggesting that the unified sense of self you maintain during waking hours might be more constructed than you realize. Carl Jung spent years analyzing his own dreams and discovered recurring patterns that seemed to connect him not just to his personal past, but to universal human themes. He began to see dreams as messages from what he called the objective psyche, a deeper layer of consciousness that operates according to its own logic, its own sense of time and meaning. In this realm, causality works differently. Symbols carry multiple meanings simultaneously. The future can influence the past just as powerfully as the past shapes the future. This dream logic might actually be closer to how consciousness naturally operates than the linear rational thinking we privilege during waking hours. When you pay attention to your dreams, you're studying the native patterns of your psyche, seeing how it naturally organizes experience when freed from the constraints of external consensus reality. Keep a gentle awareness of your own dream patterns. Do certain themes, people, or situations appear repeatedly across different dreams? Do you find yourself working through similar emotional territories again and again, but with slightly different imagery and circumstances? These dream loops might be your unconscious mind's way of processing material that your waking consciousness isn't quite ready to integrate. the boundary between dreaming and waking consciousness isn't as clear as it might seem. Daydreaming, meditation, creative states, and even moments of deep absorption in activities can all produce dream-like alterations in temporal experience. You might find yourself suddenly remembering something you haven't thought about in years, or receiving insights that seem to come from outside your normal thinking process. These states suggest that the fluid, cyclical relationship with time that you experience in dreams is always available. It's not separate from ordinary consciousness, but rather represents a different mode of awareness, one that's more attuned to the deeper rhythms and patterns that shape your experience. While we've been exploring temporal loops primarily from an individual perspective, these patterns don't exist in isolation. Your personal cycles of thought, emotion, and behavior ripple outward, influencing the patterns of everyone around you, which in turn influence larger social and cultural cycles. You're not just caught in your own loops. You're part of vast, interconnected webs of cyclical influence that operate across multiple scales simultaneously. Family systems therapists have long observed how patterns get transmitted across generations, even when family members are unaware of these transmissions. A grandfather's unexpressed grief about losing his brother in war might show up as his son's difficulty with emotional intimacy, which then appears as his grandson struggles with commitment in relationships. The specific content changes, but the underlying emotional pattern persists, passed down like genetic material through the generations. Dr. Rachel Yehuda's groundbreaking research on epigenetics has revealed that trauma can literally change gene expression in ways that get passed to offspring. Children and grandchildren of survivors of historical mass trauma, for instance, show measurable differences in stress hormone regulation even if they never experienced trauma themselves. The past doesn't just live in memory, it lives in biology, in the very molecules that make up your cells. But this transmission isn't just about trauma. Positive patterns also ripple across time and relationships. The grandmother who learned to find joy in simple pleasures might pass that capacity to her descendants through countless small interactions, modeling a way of being that gets internalized and expressed generations later. Love, resilience, creativity, and wisdom also travel through time, creating beneficial cycles that can heal wounds from the past. On a larger scale, social movements often follow cyclical patterns that span decades or centuries. The civil rights movement of the 1960s echoed themes from the abolitionist movement of the 1800s, which in turn drew inspiration from even earlier struggles for human dignity and freedom. Each generation faces similar challenges, but brings new strategies, new language, new cultural context to bear on persistent patterns of oppression and liberation. Dr. Peter Turchin, a complexity scientist who studies historical cycles, has developed mathematical models that can predict social unrest with remarkable accuracy. His research suggests that societies oscillate between periods of integration and disintegration in predictable waves, driven by demographic pressures, economic inequality, and competition among elites. These cycles operate on timescales much longer than individual lifespans, yet they profoundly shape the context within which personal patterns unfold. This raises profound questions about agency and responsibility. If you're caught up in cycles that operate across multiple generations and social scales, how much control do you really have over your individual patterns? Are you making free choices, or are you expressing forces that began long before you were born and will continue long after you're gone? The answer might be both. You are influenced by patterns much larger than yourself, Yet your individual choices also contribute to the larger patterns. Every moment of awareness you bring to your own cycles creates a small ripple that can influence others. Every time you choose compassion over reactivity, presence over avoidance, curiosity over judgment, you're contributing to the possibility that larger patterns might shift in more beneficial directions. Take a moment to sense your own place in this vast web of interconnected patterns. Can you feel how your personal struggles and insights are part of larger conversations that humanity has been having for thousands of years? Can you sense how your individual healing might contribute to collective healing? How your personal awakening might serve something much greater than your private welfare? In the Japanese martial art of Aikido, the fundamental principle is not to resist an attacker's force, but to redirect it, using their own energy against them while maintaining your own center and balance. This same principle might apply to working with temporal loops and cyclical patterns. Instead of fighting against the repetitive nature of consciousness, what if you learn to work with its natural rhythms, redirecting their energy toward more beneficial outcomes? The Aikido master Morihei Ueshiba spoke of blending with the forces of nature rather than opposing them. He understood that water doesn't overcome rock through force, but through persistence, patience, and the ability to find the path of least resistance. Perhaps psychological and spiritual transformation follow similar principles. Instead of trying to force yourself to be different, you learn to work with the natural momentum of your patterns while subtly influencing their direction. This requires what martial artists call soft power, strength that doesn't announce itself, influence that works through receptivity rather than aggression. When you notice yourself falling into a familiar emotional pattern, instead of immediately trying to stop it, you might first acknowledge it with kindness. There's that old anxiety pattern again. Hello, old friend. What are you trying to protect me from this time? This greeting creates a moment of space, a gap in the automatic progression from trigger to reaction. In that gap, you have options that weren't available when you were completely identified with the pattern. You might choose to experience the pattern fully, but without adding resistance or judgment. You might explore what the pattern is trying to communicate. You might experiment with a slightly different response, while still honouring the pattern's underlying wisdom. Dr. Kristin Neff's research on self-compassion has shown that this kind of gentle acceptance actually facilitates change more effectively than self-criticism or force. When you meet your patterns with curiosity and kindness, rather than judgment and resistance, they naturally begin to evolve. It's as if the patterns themselves relax when they feel understood rather than attacked. But this approach requires patience and trust in the natural intelligence of consciousness. Change might happen more slowly than your mind would prefer. Patterns might transform in unexpected ways rather than simply disappearing. You might find yourself cycling through familiar territory, but with increasing awareness, depth, and skillfulness, rather than achieving some imagined state of perfect liberation from all repetitive patterns. The Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck often said that spiritual practice isn't about having different experiences, but about having a different relationship to whatever experiences arise. You might still feel anxiety, but you no longer believe that anxiety is a problem that needs to be fixed immediately. You might still find yourself in familiar relationship dynamics, but you no longer assume that these dynamics define your worth or limit your possibilities. As you experiment with this approach in your own life, notice how patterns respond to different qualities of attention. What happens when you meet a recurring thought or emotion with genuine curiosity rather than immediate judgment? How do your patterns shift when you offer them space to exist without demanding that they change or disappear? This isn't passive resignation, but active engagement with the natural rhythm of transformation. One of the deepest insights to emerge from both contemplative practice and modern psychotherapy is that healing often requires being fully present to what is arising now, while also acknowledging and honouring what has been. This creates an interesting paradox. You can't heal the past by staying trapped in it, but you also can't heal it by trying to ignore it or transcend it completely. The trauma therapist Bessel van der Kolk has spent decades studying how the body holds memory and has discovered that healing requires what he calls befriending the body. This means learning to stay present to physical sensations, emotions, and memories that might be uncomfortable or frightening. But presence doesn't mean being overwhelmed or re-traumatized. It means developing the capacity to be with difficult experience without being completely consumed by it. This is similar to what meditation teachers mean when they speak of bare attention or choiceless awareness. You're not trying to change what's happening, but you're also not passively absorbed in it. You're maintaining a kind of spacious presence that can hold whatever arises without losing its essential stability and openness. Dr. Dan Siegel, a psychiatrist who studies the intersection of mindfulness and neuroscience, describes this as developing what he calls the observing self, the part of consciousness that can witness thoughts, emotions, and sensations without being identical to them. This observing awareness doesn't eliminate patterns or make difficult experiences disappear, but it provides a stable reference point from which you can relate to changing experience. From this perspective, temporal loops aren't problems to be solved, but opportunities to develop this quality of spacious presence. Each time a familiar pattern arises, you have another chance to practice staying centered while experience moves through you. You're not trying to escape the pattern or transcend it, but learning to inhabit it more consciously, more skillfully, with greater freedom and less automatic reactivity. This paradox of presence extends to how you relate to memory itself. When painful memories arise, the healing often comes not from analysing them or trying to change them, but from learning to be present to them with compassion. The memory itself doesn't change, but your relationship to it transforms. What once felt overwhelming becomes workable. What once felt like evidence of your damage becomes evidence of your resilience. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke captured this beautifully when he wrote about learning to love your questions rather than demanding immediate answers. Perhaps the same principle applies to temporal loops and cyclical patterns. Instead of demanding that they resolve or disappear, you learn to love the questions they're asking, to appreciate the way they invite you deeper into the mystery of consciousness and existence. Take a moment to practice this paradoxical presence with whatever you're experiencing right now. Can you be fully here, listening to these words, feeling your body, noticing your breath, while also holding gentle awareness of any memories, concerns, or anticipations that might be present? This isn't about choosing between past, present, and future, but about discovering the spacious awareness that can hold all temporal experience without being trapped by any of it. As we prepare to gently conclude this exploration, it's worth remembering that the question of whether you're trapped in the past isn't just philosophical speculation. It's an active area of research across multiple scientific disciplines, from neuroscience to quantum physics to social psychology. The answers we're discovering are more complex, more beautiful, and more mysterious than any simple yes or no could capture. What emerges from this research is a picture of consciousness that is both more constrained and more free than common sense suggests. You are shaped by patterns that operate across multiple scales and time scales, from neural habits that fire in milliseconds to cultural cycles that unfold across centuries. Yet within these constraints, you also possess remarkable capacities for awareness, choice, and transformation that can influence how these patterns express themselves. The past does live within you in ways that are literal and measurable. Your brain, your body, your relationships, and your culture all carry forward patterns that were established long before you were consciously aware of them. But this carrying forward is not passive repetition. It's an active, creative process in which the past is constantly being reinterpreted, reconstructed, and reimagined in light of present circumstances and future possibilities. Perhaps the most profound insight is that the question itself, are you trapped in the past? Chowahiri changes depending on the quality of awareness you bring to it. From the perspective of unconscious identification with patterns, yes, you might be quite trapped. But from the perspective of spacious awareness that can witness patterns without being completely defined by them, those same patterns become the raw material for awakening. The loops continue, but your relationship to them transforms. The cycles persist, but you learn to surf them rather than being tumbled by them. The past remains present, but it no longer imprisons the future. This isn't a final destination, but an ongoing dance, a continuous exploration of what it means to be conscious within the vast, interconnected web of patterns that we call existence. As you drift off from this exploration, carrying these ideas gently into whatever comes next in your day or night, remember that you're not alone in this temporal maze. Every human being who has ever lived has grappled with the feeling of being caught between past and future, memory and anticipation, pattern and possibility. In recognizing this shared condition, you might find not just understanding, but a deep sense of connection to the larger human story of which your individual loops and cycles are a part. The investigation continues, both in laboratories around the world and in the laboratory of your own direct experience. Each moment offers new data, new insights, new opportunities to explore the mystery of consciousness moving through time. Whether you're trapped or free might depend less on your circumstances and more on the quality of attention you bring to whatever is arising now. And perhaps that attention itself, that capacity for awareness that can observe its own patterns and processes, is the thread that leads out of any labyrinth, the key that unlocks any prison, the light that illuminates any darkness. Not because it eliminates the maze, but because it reveals that you are never separate from the intelligence that created it. If you've been drawn to explore these deep questions about consciousness, time and reality, you might find our previous investigation equally fascinating. In Quantum Gravity, the paradox that broke Einstein's theories, we dove into how the universe's most fundamental forces reveal similar mysteries about the nature of existence itself, where the boundaries between observer and observed, past and present, become beautifully, mysteriously blurred. Mystery itself become about the nature of existence, the boundaries between observer and observed, past and present. Boeretifully, rudet, justly, bull. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once posed a question so profound it still echoes through the halls of philosophy today. He imagined a demon appearing to you in your loneliest hour, whispering that your life would repeat exactly as it is, infinite times, with every pain and every joy returning in perfect sequence. Would you curse this demon, or would you call them divine? This wasn't just philosophical speculation. Nietzsche was pointing towards something that modern science is now beginning to understand: that consciousness itself might operate through patterns of eternal return. Recent neuroscientific research has revealed that our brains don't just remember experiences, they literally relive them. When you recall a memory, your neural networks fire in nearly identical patterns to when the original event occurred. Dr. Lynn Nadel at the University of Arizona has shown that remembering isn't like playing back a recording. It's like performing the same symphony again, with the same instruments, the same conductor, the same emotional crescendos and quiet interludes. But this raises a haunting possibility. If your brain is constantly recreating past experiences with such fidelity, and if these recreations feel as real as the original events, then in what sense has the past actually ended? When you remember your first day of school, your wedding day, or a moment of profound loss, your nervous system responds as if those events are happening right now. The stress hormones flood your system, your heart rate changes, your muscles hold the same tension patterns they learned decades ago. Take a moment to notice this in your own experience. Think of a vivid memory from your childhood, perhaps the smell of your grandmother's kitchen or the feeling of summer rain on your skin. Can you sense how that memory doesn't feel like distant history, but like a present moment experience? Your brain is literally time traveling, reconstructing a past state of consciousness with such precision that your body believes it's happening now. This phenomenon extends far beyond individual psychology. Entire cultures seem caught in similar loops of repetition. The historian Arnold Toynbee spent decades studying the rise and fall of civilizations and discovered that societies follow remarkably similar patterns across different eras and continents. The same cycles of growth, flourishing, decline, and collapse play out again and again, as if human communities are trapped in a cosmic script they can't quite escape. But here's where it gets truly mysterious. Quantum physics suggests that at the most fundamental level of reality, the distinction between past, present, and future might be far more fluid than our everyday experience suggests. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics, though this remains highly speculative, hint that information can flow backward through time, that future events might somehow influence past ones. While no scientific consensus exists on these ideas, they open up profound questions about the nature of temporal experience itself. Dr. Candice Pert's groundbreaking research on neuropeptides revealed something extraordinary about how memory operates in the human body. These tiny protein molecules, which she called molecules of emotion, circulate throughout your entire system, carrying information not just in your brain, but in every cell of your body. Your liver remembers, your heart remembers, your immune system holds patterns that were established by experiences you can't consciously recall. This isn't metaphorical speaking, it's measurable biochemistry. When you experience stress, your body releases a cascade of hormones and neuropeptides that travel to receptor sites throughout your entire system. These molecules carry information about the experience, not just its emotional tone, but specific details about the context, the relationships involved, even subtle environmental factors. Your cells literally learn from these chemical messages, adapting their function to better handle similar situations in the future. But here's what makes this truly profound. These cellular memories can persist for years or even decades, continuing to influence your physiology long after the original experience has ended. Dr. Bruce Lipton's research in epigenetics has shown that environmental influences can actually change gene expression in ways that get passed down through generations. The trauma your grandmother experienced during wartime might still be influencing your stress response patterns today, encoded in the very molecules that make up your cells. Consider how this affects your daily experience. That inexplicable anxiety that arises in certain social situations might be your body remembering a pattern that was established in early childhood. The way you hold your shoulders when you're concentrating might be recreating a posture you learned while studying for difficult exams decades ago. Your digestive system might still be responding to stress patterns that were adaptive in your family of origin, but no longer serve you in your current life. As you listen to these words, take a moment to scan your body with gentle curiosity. Notice any areas of tension or holding. Can you sense how these physical patterns might be carrying forward information from experiences you've had? This isn't about judging or trying to change anything, just developing awareness of how thoroughly the past lives within your present moment embodiment. This cellular memory isn't limited to traumatic experiences. Joy, love, creativity, and profound peace also leave their molecular signatures throughout your system. The moments of deep connection you've shared with others, the experiences of natural beauty that moved you to tears, the times when you felt most authentically yourself. These positive patterns are also woven into your biological fabric, available to be reactivated when conditions align. Dr. Charles Duhigg's research into the neuroscience of habit formation has revealed something both troubling and hopeful about human behaviour. He's discovered that habits operate through what he calls neurological loops, automatic patterns that run in the basal ganglia, a primitive part of the brain that processes routine behaviours with remarkable efficiency but very little conscious oversight. Once a habit loop is established, it becomes extraordinarily resistant to change. The brain literally carves neural pathways that make certain sequences of thought and action more likely to occur. It's as if your consciousness is walking through a landscape where some paths are well-travelled highways, while others remain barely visible trails. Given the choice, your brain will almost always take the highway, even if it leads somewhere you no longer want to go. But habits aren't just individual behaviours like brushing your teeth or checking your phone. They're complex, nested systems that can encompass entire ways of being in the world. Dr. Joe Dispenza's work with brain imaging technology has shown that personality itself might be understood as a collection of habits, automatic patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving that have become so familiar they feel like your identity. This creates what Dispenza calls the addiction to the past. Your brain becomes chemically dependent on familiar emotional states, even when those states cause suffering. The neural networks associated with worry, for instance, can become so well developed that your brain craves the stress hormones and neurotransmitters that worry produces. You become literally addicted to your own anxious thoughts, not because you enjoy them, but because they've become neurologically familiar. The implications are staggering. If your personality is largely composed of habitual patterns, and if these patterns are maintained through neurochemical addiction, then changing who you are requires more than just willpower or positive thinking. It requires rewiring your brain at the molecular level, creating new neural pathways while allowing old ones to gradually weaken through disuse. Yet research in neuroplasticity offers hope. Dr. Norman Doidge's studies have shown that the brain remains capable of dramatic reorganization throughout life. New neural pathways can be formed at any age. Old patterns that seemed permanently etched can fade when they're no longer reinforced. But this process requires what neuroscientists call sustained attention, the ability to repeatedly choose new thoughts and behaviours even when the old patterns feel more comfortable. Think about your own habitual patterns. Are there ways of thinking or responding that feel automatic, as if they're happening without your conscious participation? Notice how these patterns might have served you at some point in your life, but may no longer be adaptive to your current circumstances. This awareness itself begins to create space for new possibilities, though change typically happens gradually rather than all at once. Carl Jung's concept of the collective unconscious suggests that beneath your individual psychological patterns lies a deeper layer of shared human experience. According to Jung, certain images, themes, and behavioral patterns appear spontaneously across cultures and throughout history because they're built into the very structure of human consciousness. These archetypal patterns represent the psychological equivalent of instincts, inherited tendencies that shape how you perceive and respond to fundamental life situations. But Jung went further than simply cataloguing these universal patterns. He proposed that the collective unconscious is alive, active, and constantly influencing individual behaviour in ways that most people never recognise. When you fall in love, experience loss, face a moral dilemma, or confront your own mortality, you're not just dealing with personal circumstances, you're participating in dramas that have played out countless times throughout human history. This perspective suggests that your individual temporal loops are nested within much larger cycles of collective human experience. The relationship patterns you find yourself repeating might echo archetypal dynamics that have been playing out for millennia. The career struggles you face might reflect universal tensions between security and creativity, conformity and authenticity, individual ambition and collective responsibility. Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who has spent decades studying folklore and mythology, has observed that the same basic stories appear in every culture, though with different characters and settings. The hero's journey, the wise elder, the trickster, the devoted lover, the wounded healer, these archetypal roles seem to emerge spontaneously from the human psyche, as if consciousness itself is structured around certain fundamental patterns of meaning. From this perspective, your personal patterns aren't just individual quirks or psychological wounds, they're your unique participation in universal human themes. The part of you that seeks approval might be expressing the archetypal child seeking parental love. The part that craves adventure might be channeling the eternal explorer. The part that fears abandonment might be connected to ancient survival instincts that helped your ancestors navigate dangerous social environments. This doesn't diminish your personal responsibility or agency. Instead, it places your individual struggles and growth within a much larger context of meaning. You're not just trying to solve your own psychological problems, you're participating in humanity's ongoing exploration of what it means to be conscious, to love, to create, to suffer, and to find meaning in existence. As you reflect on your own life patterns, can you sense these deeper archetypal currents moving through your experience? Are there roles you find yourself playing repeatedly? The caretaker, the rebel, the seeker, the teacher? Notice how these roles might connect you, not just to your personal history, but to the broader human story of which your individual life is a part. The mysteries of quantum mechanics offer intriguing parallels to the cyclical nature of consciousness, though we must be careful not to draw direct causal connections where none exist scientifically. In quantum physics, the act of observation appears to play a fundamental role in determining which potential reality becomes manifest. Before measurement, particles exist in what physicists call superposition, multiple possible states simultaneously. Only when observed do they collapse into a single, definite state. This remains one of the most puzzling aspects of quantum theory, and no scientific consensus exists about whether consciousness directly influences quantum events. However, the parallel to psychological experience is worth contemplating metaphorically. Your thoughts, emotions, and behavioural patterns might exist in a kind of psychological superposition until the moment you observe them consciously. The act of awareness itself might play a role in determining which potentials become manifest in your experience. Dr. Stuart Hameroff and Sir Roger Penrose have proposed, though this remains highly speculative and unproven, that consciousness might emerge from quantum processes within the brain's microtubules. If this theory proves correct, it could suggest that consciousness operates according to quantum principles rather than purely classical physics. This might explain why awareness seems to have such a transformative effect on psychological patterns, not through mystical intervention, but through the natural properties of quantum systems. But even without invoking exotic physics, the observer effect in psychology is well documented and measurable. When you bring conscious attention to automatic patterns of thought or emotion, those patterns begin to change. This isn't because observation magically transforms reality, but because consciousness appears to be inherently creative, always generating new possibilities within the context of existing conditions. Dr. Daniel Siegel's research on mind sight, the ability to see the internal world of self and others, has shown that developing observational awareness literally changes brain structure. Neural integration increases, emotional regulation improves, and new patterns of response become possible. The act of watching your own mind seems to free you from complete identification with any particular mental content. This creates an interesting paradox. The more clearly you can observe your temporal loops and cyclical patterns, the less trapped by them you become. It's as if consciousness has a natural tendency toward freedom that expresses itself whenever awareness is brought to bear on unconscious processes. You're still participating in the patterns, but you're no longer completely identified with them. Take a moment to experiment with this quality of observational awareness. Can you notice the thoughts that are arising in your mind right now without being completely absorbed by their content? Can you observe your emotions without immediately trying to change them or being overwhelmed by them? This isn't about detachment or dissociation, but about developing what meditation teachers call spacious awareness, the capacity to hold experience without being contracted around it. Nature operates through cycles, within cycles, within cycles, daily rhythms nested within monthly patterns, nested within seasonal changes, nested within multi-year climatic variations. Your human consciousness evolved within this cyclical matrix, and your psychological patterns might naturally reflect these deeper rhythms of the natural world. Dr. Russell Foster's research on circadian biology has revealed that nearly every cell in your body contains molecular clocks that oscillate with roughly 24-hour periodicity. These cellular timepieces don't just regulate sleep and wake cycles, they influence hormone production, body temperature, immune function, even gene expression. You're literally a walking symphony of interlocking biological rhythms, each one calibrated to different aspects of Earth's rotation and orbit. But these natural cycles extend beyond individual biology. Dr. Peter Turchin's studies in cliodynamics, the mathematical analysis of historical patterns, suggest that human societies also operate according to predictable cycles. Population dynamics, economic fluctuations, social unrest, and cultural change all seem to follow wave-like patterns that can be measured and to some extent predicted. These discoveries point toward a profound possibility that the temporal loops you experience in your personal life might be expressions of much larger natural rhythms. Your periods of growth and contraction, creativity and rest, social engagement and solitude might not be personal failures or neuroses, but natural expressions of cyclical processes that operate at every scale of existence. Indigenous wisdom traditions have long recognized these connections between personal and cosmic rhythms. Many Native American cultures speak of the medicine wheel, a circular representation of the natural cycles that govern both outer nature and inner consciousness. According to these teachings, human beings naturally move through predictable phases of development that mirror the seasons, the lunar cycles, and the great cosmic rhythms of expansion and contraction. From this perspective, your experience of being caught in temporal loops isn't necessarily a problem to be solved, but a natural expression of how consciousness participates in the larger rhythms of existence. The challenge isn't to escape these cycles, but to align with them more consciously, to recognize their natural wisdom rather than fighting against their inevitable flow. Consider your own life patterns through this lens. Do you notice seasonal changes in your energy, creativity, or emotional states? Are there times of year when certain memories or themes naturally arise? Can you sense how your personal cycles might be connected to larger rhythms in your family, community, or culture? This awareness doesn't require you to believe in mystical connections, just to notice the actual patterns that appear when you pay attention. If you enjoy drifting through these explorations without interruption, members get every episode 48 hours early, completely ad-free. You can join them whenever you feel ready. Every night, you enter a natural laboratory for studying consciousness and its relationship to time. In dreams, the normal rules of temporal progression dissolve completely. Past and present intermingle freely. Causality operates according to its own logic. Characters from different periods of your life appear together in impossible combinations. Yet somehow, dream experience often feels more emotionally real than waking consciousness, suggesting that linear time might not be as fundamental to awareness as we typically assume. Dr. Stephen LeBurge's research at Stanford University has shown that lucid dreaming, becoming conscious within a dream while it's happening, offers a unique window into the nature of consciousness itself. During lucid dreams, you can observe the dream-creating process in real time, watching how the mind constructs experience from memory, emotion, and imagination. You can experiment with different ways of responding to dream scenarios, essentially practicing new patterns of consciousness in a safe environment. But lucid dreaming reveals something even more profound about temporal loops. In dreams, you often find yourself working through the same emotional territories again and again, but with slightly different imagery and circumstances. A lucid dreamer can recognize these recurring themes and consciously choose to respond differently, potentially healing psychological patterns that have been repeating for years or decades. Dr. Jane Gackenbach has studied how lucid dream practice affects waking consciousness and discovered that people who become skilled at lucid dreaming often report increased psychological flexibility in their daily lives. They become less identified with automatic emotional reactions and more capable of choosing their responses to challenging situations. The skills developed in the dream laboratory transfer to waking awareness. This suggests that consciousness might be more malleable than we typically assume. If you can learn to navigate dream states consciously, changing patterns that seemed fixed and automatic, then perhaps the temporal loops of waking consciousness are also more fluid than they appear. The same awareness that allows you to recognize you're dreaming might allow you to recognize when you're caught in unconscious patterns during waking hours. Ancient Tibetan Buddhist practices like dream yoga take this insight even further. According to these traditions, recognizing the dreamlike nature of all experience, not just night dreams but waking consciousness as well, is a key to spiritual liberation. From this perspective, your entire life might be understood as a kind of lucid dream, where increasing awareness allows for greater freedom within whatever patterns are arising. As you lie down to sleep tonight, you might experiment with setting an intention to become conscious within your dreams. But even if lucidity doesn't arise, you can pay attention to the themes and patterns that appear in your dream life. What recurring scenarios show up? What emotions tend to dominate? How do dream narratives relate to your waking patterns? Your dreams are offering you direct insight into the deeper rhythms of your consciousness. One of the most profound insights to emerge from studying temporal loops is that progress doesn't always look like linear advancement. Sometimes the deepest transformation happens through what appears to be repetition, cycling through the same themes and challenges but with increasing depth, wisdom and skillfulness. Dr. Claire Graves' research on human development revealed that both individuals and societies move through predictable stages of consciousness, but these stages are arranged in a spiral pattern rather than a straight line. As you develop, you don't leave previous stages behind entirely. Instead, you integrate them into more complex and inclusive worldviews. You revisit the same fundamental human concerns: security, belonging, autonomy, meaning, but from increasingly sophisticated perspectives. This spiral model explains why personal growth often feels like you're going in circles. You might find yourself dealing with similar relationship patterns or career challenges at different stages of your life. But each encounter offers an opportunity to bring greater awareness, more resources, and deeper understanding to bear on familiar themes. What looked like failure to learn from experience might actually be evidence of consciousness naturally spiraling toward greater complexity and integration. The mythologist Joseph Campbell discovered similar patterns in the world's great stories and spiritual traditions. The hero's journey doesn't end with the hero reaching some final destination. Instead, the hero returns to the ordinary world with new knowledge and abilities, only to be called to new adventures that cycle through similar themes at deeper levels. The spiral never ends, but each revolution brings greater wisdom and capacity for service. This perspective radically reframes the experience of being caught in temporal loops. Instead of seeing repetitive patterns as evidence of your psychological limitations, you might recognize them as the natural curriculum through which consciousness develops. The difficult relationship that keeps arising in different forms might be offering you increasingly sophisticated lessons about love, boundaries, and authenticity. The work challenges that repeat across different jobs might be inviting you to develop greater clarity about your values and purpose. Dr. Robert Keegan's research on adult development has shown that most people continue evolving psychologically throughout their entire lives, but this evolution happens through predictable stages that involve cycling back through fundamental questions about identity, meaning, and relationship. Each stage represents a more complex way of understanding yourself and your place in the world, but the basic themes remain remarkably consistent. Consider your own life from this spiral perspective. Can you identify core themes that have appeared repeatedly, but with increasing depth and nuance? Are there challenges you've faced multiple times, but with growing skill and understanding? This isn't about consoling yourself for being unable to escape your patterns. It's about recognizing that the patterns themselves might be vehicles for awakening to greater possibilities. While we've been exploring temporal loops, primarily from an individual perspective, these patterns don't exist in isolation. Your personal cycles of growth and challenge are embedded within larger systems of family, community, culture, and species. The loops you experience might serve purposes that extend far beyond your individual welfare, contributing to collective learning and evolution in ways that aren't immediately obvious. Here, Dr. Rupert Sheldrake's research into morphic resonance, though controversial and not accepted by mainstream science, suggests that patterns of behaviour and organisation can spread across space and time through non-physical means. According to this speculative theory, when members of a species learn new behaviours or develop new capacities, this learning becomes available to other members of the species even without direct contact or genetic inheritance. While morphic resonance remains unproven and disputed, there's abundant evidence for more conventional forms of collective learning and pattern transmission. Family systems therapists have long observed how psychological patterns get passed down through generations, often unconsciously. Children absorb not just the explicit teachings of their parents, but their emotional patterns, coping strategies, and unconscious beliefs about reality. But this transmission isn't just about perpetuating dysfunction. Positive patterns also spread through families and communities. The grandmother who learned to find joy in simple pleasures might pass that capacity to her descendants through countless small interactions. The teacher who discovered how to remain calm under pressure might influence hundreds of students who then carry that modelling into their own relationships and work. Social movements often follow similar patterns of collective learning. The civil rights movement of the 1960s drew upon strategies and insights developed by earlier generations of activists, but also contributed new approaches that continue to influence social change efforts decades later. Each generation faces similar challenges but brings new resources, new technologies, and new cultural context to bear on persistent patterns of oppression and liberation. Dr. Daniel Siegel's research on interpersonal neurobiology has shown that consciousness itself might be fundamentally relational rather than individual. According to his findings, the brain develops and continues to function through constant interaction with other brains. Your individual patterns of thought and emotion are shaped by and continuously influence the patterns of everyone around you. This suggests that your personal work with temporal loops and cyclical patterns isn't just about your own healing and development. It's also a contribution to the collective intelligence of your species. Every moment of awareness you bring to unconscious patterns creates a small ripple that can influence others. Every time you choose consciousness over reactivity, presence over avoidance, love over fear, you're contributing to the possibility that larger patterns might shift in more beneficial directions. Take a moment to sense your own place in this vast web of interconnected learning. Can you feel how your personal struggles and insights are part of larger conversations that humanity has been having for thousands of years? Can you imagine how your individual awakening might serve something much greater than your private welfare? The Japanese martial art of Aikido offers a profound metaphor for working skillfully with temporal loops and cyclical patterns. In Aikido, the fundamental principle is not to resist, an opponent's attack, but to blend with their energy, redirecting it while maintaining your own center and balance. The Aikido master uses the attacker's own force against them, transforming what appears to be opposition into a harmonious dance. This same principle might apply to your relationship with repeating patterns in consciousness. Instead of fighting against the cyclical nature of thought and emotion, what if you learn to work with its natural rhythms? Instead of seeing temporal loops as enemies to be defeated, what if you recognize them as partners in an ongoing dance of awakening? Dr. Tara Brach's teachings on radical acceptance point toward this kind of Aikido-like relationship with difficult experience. Rather than immediately trying to fix, change, or escape challenging emotions or situations, she suggests first offering them complete acceptance. This doesn't mean passive resignation or giving up on the possibility of change. Instead, it means meeting what's arising with curiosity and kindness rather than resistance and judgment. This approach often has paradoxical effects. When patterns feel accepted rather than attacked, they naturally begin to soften and transform. It's as if the patterns themselves relax when they feel understood rather than opposed. The energy that was previously locked up in resistance becomes available for creative response and conscious choice. But this requires what martial artists call soft power, strength that doesn't announce itself, influence that works through receptivity rather than force. When you notice yourself falling into a familiar emotional pattern, instead of immediately trying to stop it, you might first acknowledge it with appreciation. Ah, there's that old protection pattern again. Thank you for trying to keep me safe. What are you sensing that I need to pay attention to? This kind of greeting creates space, a gap in the automatic progression from trigger to reaction. In that gap, options become available that weren't visible when you were completely identified with the pattern. You might choose to experience the pattern fully, but without adding layers of self-judgment or resistance. You might explore what the pattern is trying to communicate. You might experiment with a slightly different response, while still honoring the pattern's underlying wisdom. The martial artist Morihei Ueshiba, who founded Aikido, spoke of becoming one with the forces of nature rather than opposing them. He understood that water doesn't overcome rock through force, but through patience, persistence, and finding the path of least resistance. Perhaps consciousness transformation follows similar principles, not through violent rupture with the past, but through gentle, persistent redirection of existing energies toward more harmonious expression. As you experiment with this approach in your own life, notice how different qualities of attention affect your relationship with the recurring patterns. What happens when you meet a familiar thought or emotion with genuine curiosity rather than immediate judgment? How do your patterns respond when you offer them space to exist without demanding that they change immediately? Perhaps the most beautiful realization about temporal loops is that they all happen in one place, the eternal present moment. This isn't mystical poetry, but observable fact. You can never actually experience the past or future directly. Only present moment thoughts about the past, present moment emotions about the future, present moment sensations in your body that carry forward patterns established long ago. Dr. Alan Wallace, a contemplative scientist who bridges Eastern meditation practices with Western neuroscience, has spent decades studying what he calls the substrate consciousness, the background awareness within which all temporal experience arises. According to his research, which draws from both scientific observation and deep contemplative practice, this substrate remains constant even as thoughts, emotions, and sensations flow through it like clouds across an empty sky. When you sit quietly and observe your own mind, you might notice this quality of awareness that remains steady even as mental content changes. Memories arise and dissolve, plans form and fade, emotions surge and subside. Yet something remains constant throughout all these fluctuations, a spacious presence that witnesses the dance of consciousness without being disturbed by its movements. This witnessing awareness doesn't exist in time in the same way that thoughts and emotions do. It's more like the space within which temporal experience unfolds. From this perspective, the question of being trapped in the past takes on new meaning. The awareness that recognizes temporal patterns isn't itself caught within them. It's the unchanging context within which all patterns arise and dissolve. Dr. Judson Brewer's neuroscience research has mapped what happens in the brain during advanced meditative states, and his findings support this experiential observation. He's discovered that as meditation deepens, activity in the default mode network, the brain regions associated with self-referential thinking and temporal projection, gradually quiets. What emerges is a state of effortless awareness that exists prior to the construction of past and future. This doesn't mean that memory or planning disappear. Instead, they're recognized as present moment activities rather than actual journeys through time. When you remember your childhood, you're not traveling backward in time. You're having a present moment experience of remembering. When you worry about tomorrow, you're not accessing future reality. You're experiencing present moment anxiety about imagined scenarios. Take a moment right now to explore this for yourself. Notice that as you listen to these words, everything you're experiencing, thoughts, feelings, bodily sensations, sounds, even your sense of being a person with a history and a future, is happening now. The past exists only as present moment memory. The future exists only as present moment imagination. This moment is the only place where life actually occurs. This recognition can be both liberating and disorienting. If everything is happening now, then the temporal loops we've been exploring aren't traps that extend through time. They're present moment patterns of consciousness, habits of awareness that can potentially shift in this very moment. The past doesn't hold you captive because the past exists only in your current thinking about it. Yet this doesn't minimize the very real effects that past experience can have on present moment consciousness. The neural pathways carved by previous experiences continue to influence how you perceive and respond to current situations. The emotional patterns learned in childhood continue to shape your reactions to relationships. But even these influences are happening now, in the present moment flow of consciousness. What changes when you recognize this? You begin to see that you're not a victim of your past, but a participant in an ongoing creative process. Every moment offers the possibility of relating to familiar patterns in new ways. You're not trying to escape from time, but learning to inhabit it more consciously, more choicefully, with greater awareness of your role in co-creating your experience. One of the most profound discoveries in trauma therapy is that healing often happens not through analysing or understanding painful experiences, but through learning to be present with them without being overwhelmed. Dr. Peter Levine's work with somatic experiencing has shown that the nervous system has an innate capacity to complete interrupted stress responses when conditions feel safe enough. But this healing presence isn't something you have to create or generate. It's more like remembering a capacity that's always been available. The same awareness that can observe temporal loops without being caught in them can also witness pain without being destroyed by it. This isn't about becoming numb or detached, but about discovering a quality of presence that's large enough to hold difficult experience without losing its essential stability. Consider how this might apply to your own relationship with painful memories or recurring emotional patterns. When old grief arises, instead of immediately trying to distract yourself or analyze why it's appearing, what happens if you simply let it be present? Can you offer it the same spacious awareness you might give to a sunset or a piece of music? Not trying to change it, but allowing it to move through your consciousness naturally. This approach requires enormous gentleness and self-compassion. Many painful patterns developed as creative adaptations to overwhelming circumstances. The part of you that learned to be hypervigilant in chaotic environments was protecting your survival. The part that learned to shut down emotionally was preserving your capacity to function under impossible conditions. These patterns deserve recognition for their original wisdom, even as they may need to evolve in your current circumstances. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's research has shown that trauma healing often involves what he calls befriending the body, learning to stay present to physical sensations and emotions that might feel threatening. But presence doesn't mean being flooded or re-traumatized. It means developing the capacity to touch difficult experience lightly, like dipping your finger in water to test its temperature before deciding whether to wade in. This quality of gentle presence can transform your relationship to temporal loops. Instead of seeing recurring patterns as evidence of your brokenness or failure to heal, you begin to recognize them as opportunities to practice presence. Each time a familiar emotional pattern arises, you have another chance to meet it with awareness rather than automatic reactivity. The meditation teacher Jon Kabat-Zinn describes this as falling awake, a gradual recognition that you have more choice in how you relate to experience than you might have realized. You can't always control what arises in consciousness, but you can influence how you meet what arises. This shift from trying to control content to developing skillful relationship with whatever appears is often where real transformation happens. As you rest in this moment, listening to these words, notice if there are any areas of tension or holding in your body. Can you offer these sensations the same quality of gentle attention you might give to a friend who's sharing something difficult? This isn't about trying to fix or change anything, just about practicing presence with whatever is actually here. Your personal work with temporal patterns and cyclical consciousness doesn't happen in isolation. Every moment of increased awareness, every choice toward presence over reactivity, every act of self-compassion ripples outward through the interconnected systems of which you're a part. Family patterns that have persisted for generations can shift when one member begins to relate to them differently. Dr. Murray Bowen's family systems theory reveals how psychological patterns flow through family networks like currents through water. When one person in a family system develops what Bowen calls differentiation, the ability to maintain their own center while remaining connected to others, it creates space for everyone in the system to function more freely. The person doesn't try to change other family members directly. Instead, they change their own part in the family dance, which naturally invites new responses from others. This principle extends beyond families to all the systems you participate in: friendships, work environments, communities, even the larger cultural conversations of your time. When you stop unconsciously reacting from old patterns and begin responding from present moment awareness, you offer others permission to do the same. You become what systems theorists call a non-anxious presence, someone who can remain centered even when others around them are caught in reactive patterns. But this isn't about becoming emotionally distant or taking responsibility for everyone else's healing. It's about recognizing that consciousness is inherently relational. Your state of awareness affects and is affected by the awareness of everyone around you. When you're able to meet your own patterns with compassion rather than judgment, you naturally extend that same quality of presence to others. Dr. Daniel Siegel's research on interpersonal neurobiology has shown that emotional regulation is fundamentally collaborative. Mirror neurons in your brain are constantly attuned to the emotional states of people around you, and your emotional state is simultaneously influencing theirs. This means that your personal practice of presence and awareness is never just personal, it's always also a contribution to the collective field of consciousness. Some research in this area remains controversial and preliminary, but there are intriguing studies suggesting that group meditation practices might influence social dynamics in measurable ways. While these findings need further verification and don't imply that consciousness directly causes large-scale changes, they point toward the possibility that individual contemplative practice might have effects that extend beyond the individual practitioner. Consider how this understanding might influence your motivation for working with your own temporal patterns. Your healing isn't just about your personal welfare, but about your capacity to serve something larger than yourself. When you're less caught in unconscious reactivity, you're more available to respond to the needs of your time with creativity and wisdom rather than automatic programming. This perspective can transform periods of difficulty from purely personal struggles into opportunities for service. When you're working through old grief, you're developing your capacity to be present with suffering, a skill that allows you to support others who are grieving. When you're learning to stay centered during conflict, you're developing the ability to help de-escalate tensions in your community. Take a moment to sense your own place in this web of interconnected healing. Can you feel how your personal work with consciousness contributes to the larger work of human awakening? This isn't grandiose thinking, but recognition of the simple truth that we're all connected, all influencing each other constantly through the quality of presence we bring to each moment. Throughout history, contemplative traditions have developed sophisticated technologies for working with the cyclical nature of consciousness. These practices, meditation, prayer, ritual, ceremony, represent thousands of years of research into the nature of awareness and how it can be cultivated and refined. Now, modern neuroscience is beginning to validate and understand these ancient discoveries through the lens of brain imaging and molecular biology. Dr. Sarah Lazar's research at Harvard has shown that regular meditation practice literally changes brain structure. Areas associated with attention, sensory processing, and emotional regulation become thicker and more integrated. Meanwhile, the amygdala, the brain region associated with fear and stress reactivity, becomes less reactive to challenging stimuli. These aren't just temporary states achieved during meditation, but permanent changes in how the brain processes experience. But contemplative practices don't work by forcing the brain into different patterns. Instead, they create conditions that allow the nervous system's natural capacity for healing and integration to emerge. Dr. Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory explains how practices like slow breathing, chanting, and gentle movement activate the parasympathetic nervous system, creating a physiological state of safety that allows for deeper healing and transformation. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition speaks of meditation in action, bringing contemplative awareness into daily activities rather than confining it to formal sitting practice. From this perspective, any moment can become an opportunity to practice presence. Washing dishes, walking to work, having a difficult conversation. All of these ordinary activities can become vehicles for cultivating the quality of awareness that transforms your relationship to temporal patterns. This doesn't require adopting any particular religious or spiritual belief system. The practices work through natural mechanisms of neuroplasticity and nervous system regulation that are available to anyone, regardless of their philosophical orientation. What matters isn't what you believe, but how consistently you practice bringing conscious attention to the present moment flow of experience. Dr. Richie Davidson's research at the University of Wisconsin has identified what he calls the 4 constituents of well-being that can be strengthened through contemplative practice: sustained attention, emotional regulation, metacognitive awareness, and loving kindness. Each of these capacities directly relates to working skillfully with temporal loops and cyclical patterns of consciousness. Sustained attention allows you to notice patterns as they arise rather than being unconsciously swept away by them. Emotional regulation helps you stay present with difficult feelings without being overwhelmed or reactive. Metacognitive awareness enables you to observe your own thinking process without being completely identified with its content. And loving kindness provides the emotional foundation that makes transformation possible. You can't heal what you hate about yourself. The beautiful thing about these practices is their accessibility. You don't need special equipment, expensive training, or exotic locations. The laboratory is always available in this moment, in whatever circumstances you find yourself. Every breath is an opportunity to practice presence. Every interaction is a chance to respond from awareness rather than automatic programming. As you listen to these words, you might experiment with some of these principles. Can you feel your breath without trying to change it? Can you notice thoughts arising and dissolving without getting caught in their content? Can you offer yourself the same kindness you might give to a beloved friend who's struggling? These simple practices, done consistently, have the power to transform your entire relationship to time, memory, and the cyclical patterns of consciousness. As we near the end of this exploration, it's worth acknowledging that the question of whether you're trapped in the past doesn't have a simple answer. The more deeply you investigate the nature of consciousness, time, and human experience, the more mysterious it all becomes. But perhaps that's exactly as it should be. Perhaps the value isn't in reaching final conclusions, but in learning to live comfortably with profound questions. Perhaps the most profound realization is that the question itself has transformed during our journey together. We began by asking whether you're trapped in the past, as if this were a problem with a definitive answer. But what we've discovered is far more nuanced and beautiful. The past isn't a place you can be trapped in, because the past exists only as present moment experience. Yet the patterns established by previous experience continue to shape consciousness in ways that are both constraining and creative. You are simultaneously more bound and more free than you might have imagined. Bound by neural pathways carved through repetition, by family patterns transmitted across generations, by cultural cycles that span centuries. Yet free in your capacity to bring awareness to these patterns, to relate to them with curiosity rather than identification, to find within even the most challenging loops opportunities for deepening wisdom and compassion. The loops continue, but your relationship to them can transform completely. The cycles persist, but you can learn to dance with them rather than being tumbled by their momentum. This isn't about escaping the human condition, but about inhabiting it more consciously, more skillfully, with greater appreciation for the mysterious intelligence that weaves through all temporal experience. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, notice how even the boundary between waking and dreaming dissolves into something larger. In dreams, you'll continue this exploration of time and consciousness, cycling through patterns both personal and archetypal, working through the great themes that connect you to every human who has ever wondered about the nature of existence. And perhaps that's the most beautiful discovery of all. In questioning whether you're trapped in the past, you've joined a conversation that stretches back to the earliest philosophers and forward to future generations who will continue unraveling these mysteries. Your individual loops and patterns aren't signs of your isolation, but evidence of your participation in the vast, interconnected web of consciousness, exploring itself through countless forms across endless time. The investigation never truly ends, only deepens. Each moment offers new data about the nature of awareness, new opportunities to practice presence, new invitations to respond to life's patterns with greater wisdom and love. Whether you're trapped or free depends not on your circumstances, but on the quality of attention you bring to whatever is arising now. Rest well, knowing that you're exactly where you need to be in this cosmic curriculum of awakening. The past lives within you not as a prison, but as a treasure house of experience. The future calls to you not as an escape, but as an invitation to apply everything you've learned. And the present moment holds you gently, the eternal space within which all temporal experience unfolds, mysterious and perfect just as it is.